Before we delve into the nitty-gritty of all of this, if you are just looking for a refresher on how to launch sparrows without lock using Boresight mode and want it in the shortest form possible, feel free to skip ahead to the timecode on screen now for the recap. Just a caveat, this guide has no real bearing on whatever F-4 pilots did in real life. In fact, they probably never did this. Pretty much the only thing I do in DCS that is similar to what real F-4 pilots did is drink in air, which makes me even better at it. In essence, putting the radar into Boresight mode shoots the radar out forwards, locks straight along the bore sight, surprisingly enough. Pressing the Boresight button puts the aircraft into Boresight mode, and you can tell that it's on by seeing the radar transform into a line on your radar screen. It's important to remember how a radar lock fundamentally works. In simple terms, it's just a focused beam of radar centered on the target that provides information to a missile. By using Boresight mode, you are taking the aiming of this beam of focused radar and aiming it manually. It's a great tool to play with when you're first becoming familiar with the F-4, and when you're flying around in training servers, it's useful to find some non-hostile aircraft and try pointing the boresight at it just to see how they manifest themselves on the scope. Try it looking at the ground and also looking at the sky with the backdrop, and you'll be able to see how the different levels of ground clutter can change the way that this represents itself on the scope. This mode will provide data up to 5 nautical miles away. From here, there are several things that you can do. A long press of the Jester context action instructs Jester to attempt a lock on whatever the boresight is pointed at, and if a plane is clearly identifiable from the ground, he will usually succeed. When locking like this, the 4, or 2, depending on your process, second sparrow timer still needs to pass before you can launch. In my opinion, this almost always takes too long to do, with exceptions which I'll get into later. A double short press of the Jester context action will instruct Jester to go back to standard search mode, the equivalent of pressing the air-to-air button in the back seat. This will essentially set your radar back to default. Pressing the nose gear steering while in boresight will activate Computer Automatic Acquisition, or CAA mode, which is similar to the dogfight modes in other planes. It will scan the sky in 78 degrees of height and 15 degrees of width. Depending on which weapon mode you have selected, will change whether this scans 15 degrees to the left, center, or right. Gun scans 15 degrees to the left, Heat scans the center, and radar scans to the right. From personal experience, this mode is very difficult to use anywhere near the ground, with the F-4's propensity to lock onto ground clutter, and I avoid using it at low altitude. The same 4-second sparrow timing still applies to locks achieved this way. You can go back to standard search with a double short press of the Jester context action, or by pressing the Boresight mode button one more time. Most importantly for what we're doing, a short press of the Jester context action within Boresight mode will start him cycling through different options of the aspect knob. These aspects are nose, forward, aft, tail, and wide. By default, Jester will have the knob set to wide, the only aspect that covers all speeds. However, it does this with much less precision than using a specific mode, and is best to use only when you're truly out of time. Pressing the context action will go from wide into these 4 modes. Nose, which is a closure rate of true airspeed 450 knots plus or minus 150, so 300 to 600 knots of closure. Forward, closure rate of true airspeed 240 knots plus or minus 150, so 90 to 390 knots of closure. Aft, closure rate of true airspeed minus 240 knots, so they are getting further away from you at 240 knots, plus or minus 150. So from minus 90 to minus 390 knots of closure, or the speed at which they're getting away from you. Tail, the closure rate of true airspeed 0 plus or minus 150, so minus 150 to 150 knots of closure, either getting closer or further away. After that, Jester will cycle back to wide at the start. It does not take too long to cycle through these modes, especially if you know which one you're going for. If you are pointing the gun sight at a target and keep it within about 5 degrees of the sight, With the appropriate speed gate set, you can pull the trigger and let a sparrow fly. It will guide itself towards the target, so long as it stays within your scope. They are more manoeuvrable than they get credit for, especially the AIM 7E-2, which is really good for doing this, and it's a really fun way to get kills with the jet. For me, the nomenclature of aspect is understandable, but it can lead to some confusion. The intended effect is obvious. Each of these settings on the dial is a likely direction that a fighter of the time is going to be travelling to achieve those closure rates, but it is not a hard rule, and thinking about it flexibly can help you get more kills. The period in which Boresight mode is most useful is before the F-4 gets access to all aspect heat seekers, so in many Cold War scenarios. I want you to keep in mind the kinds of fights that you will find yourself in these scenarios, especially with EWR available. Typically, a fight will begin in one of three ways. You will either merge head-on with someone coming towards you, or enter into a fight that is already in progress, where people have started slowing and maneuvering against one another, or you'll be coming up upon people who are preoccupied with other tasks, like ground attack. The argument I make here is that with the closure rates of nose and forward covering from 600 knots, above which Boresight mode does not work at all the way down to 90 knots, there will only be a handful of circumstances where you need anything else. In the head-on, you will likely be in the capture range of nose, closing at 300 to 600 knots. If the closure rate is higher, then you have a clear escape window after the merge to just keep going. The distance between you two after merging will grow beyond weapons range quickly if you just continue. It is not desirable to kill your own speed and energy to get the closure rate down to 600 knots, as you'll put yourself at an energy disadvantage for the fight to come. Take the shot if you feel like it, and you might get lucky, but do not ignore the escape window to fly away, come back later, and go for another shot. When coming into a fight in progress, you must do some thinking. You must quickly identify a target that's in the mix that is definitely hostile. Then observe what they're doing. This is where the aspect knob can be confusing. A plane could be flying vertically from your perspective, for example at the apex of their vertical climb, and the tail is the part of the plane that is closest towards you. Do you switch to tail aspect? No, because it goes off closure rates. For the sake of argument, relative to you, this plane is almost stationary. You, however, for example, are travelling at 450 knots towards them. It doesn't matter what speed they're going up or down, just know how they are closing towards you relatively. So taking into account that they may be moving maybe 50 knots away from you over the course of the manoeuvre, by knowing your own speed of 450 knots, you can assume that they will fall into the 300 to 600 knot window of the nose aspect. So why do I use aft and tail aspect so little? Well, consider the circumstances. Tail goes up to 150 knots of positive closure, that is, we're moving closer together. This is almost landing speed. Either we are both on the verge of stalling out, in which case it will be difficult to keep the reticle of the bore sight on the hostile aircraft, or the plane is moving away from me, or attempting to. For aft, for a plane to be going from 90 to 300 knots of closure, that is to say negative 90 and negative 390 knots of closure moving away from you, it will definitely be moving away from us. And we have a tool for that. Our rear aspect heat seekers. If the target you are chasing is out of range of heat seekers, you arguably have the time to use context action long in Boresight mode to get Jester to try and go for a proper lock, as you will have time to take a few goes at it. If the plane you're chasing pulls hard to get away from your heat seekers, say straight up, you can keep the power on and very quickly bring them into the forward 90 knot speed gate, or you could try using wide, which should cover all speeds if they're not cluttered against the ground. This is not telling you to never use aft and tail. It is just explaining to you why I do not use them often, but it is useful to know their limitations in case one of the niche use cases for these modes shows up. I find keeping my focus on nose and forward most of the time to be the most practical, but if you disagree, please feel free to let me know in the comments. This is all relevant to lower altitudes, and circumstances will change at higher ones. But at higher altitudes, you have much less ground clutter to contend with and can start seriously considering using the computer acquisition mode or going for solid locks. In essence, Boresight mode with the aspect knob is a really useful tool to have in your F-4 toolkit, and if you get proficient at getting into it and thinking about aspects, you'll begin to notice windows of opportunity within fights to use it. Thinking consciously about closure speeds is a good practice for other jets too, so by getting to know this, you'll be getting better equipped for the hostile skies. To wrap up, here's the process in its simplest form, as promised at the start of the video. So, To Boresight Sparrow launch without lock. Step 1. Select radar with the gun missile pinky switch. Press the cage button to lock the radar into cage mode. To return to standard search, double press gesture context action. Step 2. Short press the gesture context action to get into the speed gate you want. Each press will step forward one mode. You are in wide by default. Pressing it once will go to nose, then forward, then aft, then tail, then back to wide. The speed gate ranges for each aspect are on your screen now. Step 3. Place the gun sight onto the target and pull the trigger. Keep the hostile aircraft within 5 degrees of the bore sight, as close to the gun sight as you can, until the missile impacts. You can usually see the smoke plume of your missile tracking onto the target if it's working. If your missile does not track at all, make sure it's within the bore sight. If the target never left the bore sight, your speed gate was likely wrong. If the missile was tracking the target but missed, they may have left the speed gate, or the missile may have lost the target in the ground clutter. This takes practice to get right, and is equal parts art and science. With time, you will naturally intuit the opportunities to use this mode, and get the feeling for the speed gates. You are often carrying 4 sparrows, and you might as well have a go with them when the opportunity presents itself. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have good luck fighting in your phantoms. Please let me know if you shoot anyone down in Boresight mode, and feel free to ask me on Discord if you have any questions, link below. You can also join in on my streams where you can watch me not follow my own advice. Thank you, and have a good one.